This is CHSR 97.9 FM here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. And you're listening to Python's Paradise, your film and music show. And this is your host, Greg Gilbert, a.k.a. the Python Hyena. And folks, we're going to go back into the past. Yes, that's where most of my interviews go, back in the past. But we got some interesting things to talk about. And I have a guest who's been all over the place, in front of the camera, behind the camera. He's an author. Well, he is a man of many talents. And I'm going to introduce him as Mark Bennett, who's got an interesting story to tell about a famous producer, as well as other things. How do you do, Mark?
Well, hello, Greg. Thanks for having me on your program. I appreciate it.
Yes, and much appreciated to Steve Joyner for hooking this up. I was just wondering, how do you know Steve?
Steve and I had many mutual friends, and as a result of that, that led to social media and so forth, and then that led to Steve calling me, and I want to get in touch with you, and because by that point he'd seen a lot of posts of mine and about my book and so forth and so on, and then that led to a dialogue, and he really appreciated some of my war stories, as it were, from the trenches in Hollywood.
I thought it was funny when he contacted me about interviewing you, and then he got you on the phone, and I guess you were in the movie theater with your wife at the time. Did you get to watch all of that movie Life, or did we take up all your time?
I mean, it's a fantastic roller coaster. Just to be a fan, I loved that movie. I walked out. Let's put it this way: I walked out of the movie, and it was so thrilling that I felt like there was like an air conditioning duct on my back as I'm walking out, and I felt the back of my shirt, and it was damp.
Oh. I thought you could.
At one point, my wife looked at me. She goes, "This is so suspenseful. Oh my gosh!" So it's a really fun ride for anybody who wants to have a good time and get their money's worth in the movie theater, if I just may say that. But I did miss the first, I think, 15 minutes of the movie, but turned out that it was just a cold open, as it were, and I pretty much saw the crux of the movie.
Yeah, Steve Joyner was talking. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, isn't his wife waiting for him in the movie theater? You're out there talking to us.
Yes, and I'm getting texts from my wife going, "Where are you?"
Forget about Jake Gyllenhaal. Who's the gorgeous Ferguson girl in that?
Yes. Shoot, I can't remember her first name, but Rebecca
Ferguson. No, I can't say
Ryan
forget.
Reynolds is in it. And
yeah, Ryan Reynolds. Yeah, forget them. I mean, it's me and Steve.
It's me and Steve.
Yeah,
Right.
Jake Gyllenhaal and Ryan Reynolds can wait. You got to talk to me and Steve Joyner.
And that was fine with me.
You see, it should be me and Steve Joyner and Rebecca Ferguson.
Indeed.
We'll still keep her.
Ryan's a pretty funny guy. I could hang with him, too.
You know what? I loved him as Deadpool.
Yes. I was on television, and I caught the tail end of it. I was like, I got to see this whole movie. This is funny. So at some point, I'll get around to seeing that, because every movie he's done, I always appreciate his work.
He did a movie up here in Canada that was little seen, I think, in the States, but I remember when I was interviewing Uwe Boll a couple of years ago, he brought it up, and he said he thought it was better than Prisoners. He said it was a movie called Captive. I forget the name of the director. It's the guy that made The Sweet Hereafter, had directed this movie Captive and had Ryan Reynolds in it, and it was a really good movie.
Nice. I'll have to check that out. I don't know that. Didn't he also film in Canada for the movie he did with Sandra Bullock, comedy? Betty White was in it. Can't remember the name.
The Proposal?
Of the movie. Was it?
The Proposal?
Yeah, that's it. The Proposal.
Yeah, you know what? That movie was shit.
Can you say that on genteel broadcasts such as this?
Well, I just did.
Okay.
But I gotta say, I hated The Proposal. What a stupid movie. And one thing I remember about that idiotic movie is this dog being taken. I don't know whether it was a bird or something swept down and grabbed this dog, and you got Sandra Bullock jumping up in the air and trying to get it, and it looks so fakey. I was like, jeepers. I mean, no, I thought that movie made money, and I was like, jeepers, nobody has any taste. That movie was just pure shit. Glad Ryan Reynolds has done some better stuff, moved up a little bit. Yeah. I don't know if that was the same year Sandra Bullock did All About Steve, but she got razzied for that one. Yeah,
I seem to recall that. Yeah, well, you win some, you lose some. No, of course, nobody in Hollywood sets out to make a bad picture or a bad TV show. There's a lot of chefs that can spoil the soup.
Well, and I like Sandra Bullock too, but The Proposal was a movie that made money, but I didn't care for it. I just slapping my palm to my head thinking, jeepers, there's so much more creative movies out there that aren't finding an audience. I always find it funny how big The Big Lebowski is today and the phenomenon. Yeah, but when it came out, it didn't have the big audience. I was there and saw it in theaters in 1998. But you look at it today, and you'd think it was a huge blockbuster by the way people are responding to it.
Yeah, a lot of movies find their following long after its initial release. I mean, a lot of movies and television shows have happened that way. So it's just. But then again, we were in a very different world in 1998 than we are today. So
Well, I saw a movie last year. Last year I went to a movie 9 times, and it was a movie that did not do very well, but it's one I got 2 interviews from, and I'm trying hard to push it because I loved it. It was called Everybody Wants Some, the new Richard Linklater's new one. I bought the soundtrack to it. It just took me back because I grew up with the music and loved the characters, I loved the actors, and I loved the movie. And I don't think it was marketed very well at all. And I'm like, that's a movie that had something put into it. And then, and then
another one. You've thrown out several titles. I'm going to have to check that one out too. I know Richard Linklater's work, but I don't know that particular picture, so I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, love that film. You know where I'm located up here in New Brunswick, Canada?
I just know New Brunswick.
Yeah, but there's one, I guess, in Jersey as well. So I have
to. Well, that's true.
I have to specify on that. So I had somebody catch me on that one night. It says, when you get these people to plug your show, make sure they see New Brunswick, Canada.
Yeah, yes. There's no question. There's only one New Brunswick. Is that correct?
Yeah, this one.
There's only one.
Well, I often say to people, I say, if they know who the Trailer Park Boys are, they might have an idea where we are.
Very good. Well, being born and raised in Michigan, we did many treks through the Windsor Tunnel to Canada and Toronto and Ontario, and so I have toe-dipped into Canada and loved it as a child.
Yeah, and I would love to see the Canadian film world take off a little better too, because I've noticed looking through my roster of interviews, I've interviewed a lot of Canadian talent, a lot of great Canadian talent, but I wish there'd be more movies made that are Canadian that catch an audience, because we used to be able to do that really well, and I think a lot of it's because government funding is really horrible for it.
Yeah, there's that, which is very specific to Canada. But just like anything, it's just the pendulum, and eventually the pendulum will swing back. And that's just everything runs in cycles, as you know. So especially in entertainment. So.
Yeah, well, we gotta get movies shot up here. We gotta get because this is a running joke I hear from people. With Trump being president, more people, I think, are focused on coming to Canada.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine is shooting a pilot in Vancouver as we speak. They got 2 more days before they're off to the races. But there's still, for someone who lives in Los Angeles, California, I would like the productions to come back, but they're still, shooting for the tax incentives and so forth, and the beauty and the location, et cetera, of a lot of the towns up in Canada, and Vancouver is definitely one of them. Toronto was the hot spot for a while in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Everybody was shooting in Toronto. And then now it's Atlanta, New York, even Michigan, Ann Arbor, et cetera. But some of the productions are coming back, which is nice for me.
I need to insist they come and shoot in New Brunswick.
Okay.
I often joke. I said nobody knows where we are. I bet you Trump don't know where we are.
Like I said, there's only one New Brunswick.
There we go. Yeah. Anyway, Mark, I was wondering if you would give us some of your background, where you came from and your trek to Los Angeles.
Sure. I was born and raised in Michigan, as I said earlier. Born in Detroit, Royal Oak, really. And then my family, I was raised in Kalamazoo, Michigan, direct-to-you Kalamazoo. And then when I was still in junior high or middle school, they call it today, my family transplanted to Boulder, Colorado, which, in my opinion, was a wonderful place to grow up and so beautiful and all about the outdoors. And that is where I did my formative years that led to the University of Colorado in Boulder. And I studied music at the School of Music, studied piano, classical piano, and with a minor in theater. And at some point, I had an opportunity to audition for a small private school that Walt Disney created called the California Institute of the Arts. And I auditioned there, and I got in, a wing and a prayer and a little luck, and studied, and the main focus, at least musically, was to study jazz piano. And also I was able to, and had the opportunity to be in the theater school as well. So I was actually balancing two schools in my time at California Institute of the Arts, also known as CalArts. So when I graduated, I was just like any other young, early 20-something. I did the one-way ticket from Boulder to Los Angeles with no contact, no money really to speak of, no job contacts, no family, and as I also like to point out, no sense. But I did that and found a place to live because I was going to be in show business. That was the goal. So I played in bands and did little bit parts on soaps and a couple movies. And as a matter of fact, I had only been out for actually living here as a resident for a month. And I was training as a waiter, and I can tell you I was the worst waiter ever. I do not have that talent. My older brother did. He was fabulous. I thought, well, if he can do it, I can do it. Doesn't work that way. And I was awful. I tried really hard, but I broke a lot of things, and I was just not good. While I'm training at this restaurant, which was in Laurel Canyon, which is one of the thoroughfares that take you in Los Angeles from the Valley to West Hollywood and what we call the other side of the hill. And this is right in the middle of Laurel Canyon. And Laurel Canyon has its own sort of mythical position in rock and roll history because in the 60s and 70s, that's where Jim Morrison lived and Mama Cass and Peter Tork and all the Monkees, all of Fleetwood Mac, just a ton of music. Graham Nash, Joni Mitchell, Carole King. They were all living in Laurel Canyon. And so I'm at this restaurant, been a month out, and who should walk in but Val Kilmer, though your listeners will probably know and remember who Val Kilmer is, an extraordinary actor.
Top secret.
Many films, Tombstone, et cetera, et cetera. And he walked in, now kind of in a strange twist. I had actually seen him 2 years prior at the Colorado Shakespeare Festival in Boulder, where he played an amazing Hamlet. And he was wonderful. And I wasn't in the production and didn't really want to be in the production. I would have been, Spear Carrier number 3? I don't know. But what was great about that is I was able to take the classes that the people in the production taught. So I had, voice classes with the teacher, Kate Fitzmaurice was her name, from Juilliard, and I got to take Shakespeare class with Tony Church from the Royal Shakespeare Company, and so there was a cross-pollinating between the production crew and cast and the people taking the classes, and I got to do it for free because I was a Boulder resident. So anyway, he walks in, we talk about the Colorado Shakespeare Festival, we talk about Hamlet, and oh my gosh, and he takes a seat in my section. And also at the same time, I had two friends that were visiting for my inaugural training weekend kind of thing.
Okay.
So I'm kind of goofing around with my friends, and Val is watching me sort of put on this funny little character. I was kind of taking a note from Steve Martin and doing sort of an absent-minded waiter shtick. And he calls me over, Val does, and he says, that shtick you were doing with your friends, he goes, I've got a meeting coming up with one of the producers of a movie I'm doing. Would you do that same thing to us, but we won't let him in on the fact that it's a joke? And I said, sure, I'll do that. Sure enough, the producer comes, and I carry on, pour the water before I put down the glass, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And Val, of course, is inside, laughing inside, and just riding the wave. And, of course, the producer is looking at, like, this is the worst service I've ever gotten in my life. They have their meeting. He leaves. Val Kilmer says to me, he says, that was perfect. That was brilliant. He goes, so do you want to be an actor? And, green as green could be. I'm like, sure, yeah, that sounds great, And he said, do you want to be in my movie? And I said, well, and I was this green. I said, well, yeah, but I don't have an agent. And he looked at me and he says, you don't need an agent. So he says, I'm going to be in hair and makeup at 6 o'clock on Monday, and, just meet me there, and I'll get you set up. I said, okay. So then, I'm shaking his hand. I'm all excited. I'm going, oh, wow, I've been here a month, and now I'm in a movie. And, of course, it turned out that the movie was the Doors movie where he played Jim Morrison.
Oh, great movie. You're in that?
Yes, directed by Oliver Stone. And so, to me, this is like, wow, I can't believe this is happening. But at the same time, as I'm walking to my car, I'm thinking to myself, who's going to believe this young little kid going, I'm looking for the star of the movie, Val Kilmer. He told me to meet him here. Who's going to believe that? So I'm thinking, I had no cards, no handwriting of Val's, nothing. I had nothing. So Monday morning, 6 o'clock, I park my car. I dress in my hippie vest with my long hair, my Jim Morrison-y hair and all that. And you have to remember, this is 1990, so we all look like that. And I'm walking up the street, and I see the first gal coming toward me with a headset. And I'm near where Val told me to be, and I just put my best foot forward, best self-deprecating foot forward, and told my story. And I guess it worked with her because she says, oh, yeah, he's on the third trailer, off to the right and take a left there, and gave me all the directions. And I remember I said, thank you, ma'am, to her. Of course, in retrospect, I'm sure she was only 28 years old, but I said, thank you, ma'am. Mm-hmm. And I go up to where she told me to be, and I look up, and there's Val in hair and makeup, and he looks in the mirror, and he sees my reflection, and he gets up out of the chair, he jumps out of the trailer, and the first thing he says to me is, you made it. So I spent a week or two at the Doors movie. In fact, the only evidence that was even there for all those hours and all those days is there's a scene where Val Kilmer is singing "The End" at the Whiskey.
Oh yeah, that great song used in Apocalypse Now. That's right.
Same song. And he's singing "The End," and the camera pulls back from him, and it spins around, and it goes over the audience that's watching him, and then it goes up to the balcony. And standing next to Meg Ryan is a long-haired, shirtless, sweaty, fake doobie smoking me.
Gotta ask, what was it like standing next to Meg Ryan?
I'm standing next to Meg Ryan, that is correct. And she was delightful and funny in between takes and so forth. But that was my first exposure and first time I ever stepped foot on a set.
Were you nervous standing next to her? She was quite the looker.
Well, she was, and she was newly dating Dennis Quaid at the time, and he would visit frequently.
Yeah, but you can get in there. Come on now, don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, she had just done When Harry Met Sally, but I'm not sure if that had come out yet or it had just come out and I hadn't seen it yet. So I mean, I knew who she was.
Yeah.
But she was not the Meg Ryan that she became, yet.
It's funny you mentioned Meg Ryan, because sometimes from the Doors, I'll play that song Love Street, which I first heard in the Doors movie. And every time I play it, I think of Meg Ryan, because that song plays just before she's introduced into the film.
That's true. And to tie that kind of in, Love Street, the song, was written about Laurel Canyon, where the creatures meet.
Mm-hmm.
It was all about the living in Laurel Canyon and that restaurant I was training at, and it was called the Canyon Country Store above it, and that's where the creatures come to meet. And they wrote it all about. It was an homage to the life in Laurel Canyon in the '60s.
Yeah.
So. It was a great experience. And Val was extra nice to me, and a little sidebar. At one point, I'm standing up by the balcony chatting it up with Meg.
Yeah.
And Val kind of whistles and he signals for me to come down to the stage where he's standing.
Okay.
So I minnow my way through the crowd, and through all the background actors and stuff, and I get up to him at the foot of the stage, and he says, "Hey, we're gonna get some snacks across the street. Do you want to come with us?" I said, sure, So we're walking across Sunset Boulevard, me, Val Kilmer, Oliver Stone, and the other producing partner, Alex Ho. And I still can't believe I'm doing this, but we go across to this gas station. And in this gas station, it looked like a salad bar, but it was for sundaes and ice cream, and you could make a malt, and it was that kind of thing. So I'm doing a malt, and Oliver Stone's making a sundae. He looks at me and he says, so you want to be an actor? And I, again, green, with my index finger in my cheeks, yeah. He said, do you know who Danny Sugarman is? And I said, no. And he said, have you ever read the book, No One Gets Out of Here Alive? And I said, no. Of course, I'm starting to feel like I'm failing a test. I said, but I do know, I've heard of the book. I know the book. And, of course, I don't know that this guy he's describing is also a consultant on the movie. And he says, well, we have a 3-picture deal with Kuroko Pictures. This movie, JFK, and with any hope and luck, we want to do what's a movie based on Danny Sugarman's second book called Wonderland Avenue. And for right now, the working title is Wild Child. And we're looking for an unknown. And we're looking for someone that doesn't have any baggage. And you remarkably look just like Danny Sugarman did in the 70s. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, wow, show business is easy.
Yeah.
So he says, you have an 8x10? I said, yes, I do. Of course, back then it was black and white. And he said, I want you to go to Family French, which was a bookstore that carried anything entertainment, plays and stuff. And he says, I want you to get Danny Sugarman's book, Wonderland Avenue. I want you to read the book. After you read the book, I want you to call my production company. I want you to speak to my assistant, Janet Yang. Of course, now Janet Yang is a huge producer now. She says, call my assistant. I want you to tell her that I told you to call, and we'll have you come in and test to read for Danny Sugarman. So show business is easy. Did you know that, Greg?
Except I don't know if that movie got made. I think it went to Natural Born Killers.
Now that's show business.
I think it was Natural Born Killers came out after JFK. I don't think that movie got...
Well, what ended up happening, I actually did due diligence, and I called the office, and I sent my picture, and I introduced myself, et cetera, and all that kind of thing. And what ended up happening was Kuroko Pictures went bankrupt, and so any of their projects went down the drain. And as a matter of fact, just before Danny Sugarman died, and I think it was 2005 or something, he was still trying to get traction on his script to do the movie. It just never hit the light of day. So that was everybody has an almost story, and that was my first and biggest almost story.
But you got to be on the Doors, and I got that movie home on Blu-ray. I got to say, great movie, and I got to say, what a tragic life Jim Morrison lived.
Yeah, it's definitely very tragic. When the movie first came out, I actually it didn't resonate with me as much as it did with everybody else. But as I got older and saw another viewing of it, I really got to appreciate the artistry of Oliver Stone and what he did. how the whole movie feels like a hallucination. He did some remarkable work on that.
Yes, he did. He's done remarkable work on a lot of stuff, like Platoon, even going back. He's done a lot of great stuff and still continues to. But wow! But after that, I know that when you was on the phone with me and Steve, you told a really, really interesting story.
Yes, in my Zelig-like existence in Hollywood, kind of Forrest Gumpian, but in those beginning years, 2-3 years, just being a black box theater actor type, whatever. I got lucky, and I got some spots on a few shows on NBC, and they were all on the lot at the same time. It was Days of Our Lives, and it was Saved by the Bell, if anybody remembers that show.
Oh, yeah.
Still going on. I still get residual checks for it all these years later. And the soap called Santa Barbara. They were all on the lot. Now, one would think that at 23 I would be so thrilled that I'm, pursuing my dream, so-called dream, and actually getting somewhere with it. What I was more excited about was the fact that just across the studio, at Studio One, was where The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson was filmed. And in the United States, for 30 years, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television.
Oh, yeah.
He was the king.
Yep.
No one could beat him. They'd have, pretenders to the throne, and they would always go by the wayside because he was the king of late night. And I, of course, knew him when my mother would let me stay up until it no longer mattered and I could stay up on my own. It was all about Johnny Carson and who the guests were that night. So to me, that was show business. And I was lucky enough because when the things I was doing, these small little bit parts, whenever we'd have a lunch break, instead of having lunch, I'd actually march over to Studio One, and it happened to coincide with the on-camera rehearsal for the band. So I did that many times. I got to see Ray Charles, and I got to see Sting, and I got to see, the Doobie Brothers, and I got to see, you name it, Bonnie Raitt. You name it, I was able to watch these masters of pop music rehearsed.
Wow.
And I'm the only one sitting in the audience. But after a amount of time, the crew didn't mind because I wasn't there to schmooze or shake hands or whatever. I was just there to be educated. I'm a musician. I want to learn by listening and watching. Yep. And then after they were done, it's the end of my lunch break, and I'd go back to what I had to do. But there was one fateful day. You never know what fate's going to hand you. But Stevie Ray Vaughan was on and rehearsing. In fact, I even got to jam with him a little bit. That would never happen today. But I got to sit at the piano while he played. It was a wonderful moment.
Wow.
Anyway, he was playing Jimi Hendrix's Voodoo Child.
Okay.
And they were just rocking out. Loud, great, aggressive, wonderful. I mean, it's Stevie Ray Vaughan. Can't get better than that. I'm enjoying myself. And I happen to look over and I see the executive producer of the Johnny Carson show, where at that point I think he was the executive producer for 25 years or 20 years. And he was a legendary man. He'd had 60 years in show business, in the movies, on Broadway, at the studios, and then finally on television. And the Tonight Show, when most people would retire, this gentleman continued a whole new career as the executive producer. He was old Hollywood in every sense of the word. He was martinis and cigarettes. He was, the glasses and a symphony in beiges. He was just very elegantly dressed. Anyway, I saw him, Fred de Cordova, walk, and I know who he is. He walks out. He stops the stage manager while the music's going on. And but I see that he's gesturing to me. I'm the only guy sitting in the audience, so I know he's pointing to me. I'm not making a mistake about that. And I'm watching them kind of talk. I certainly can't hear what they say because the music's too loud. Stage manager goes on his way, and then Fred starts making a beeline to me. And this is when it's starting to dawn on me that, oh, maybe this is a closed set. Oh, maybe I'm not supposed to be here. Maybe all the reality is starting to wash over me as Fred is walking toward me with his cigarette and his ascot and so forth. And now I'm starting to get a little nervous. The music stops. He comes up to me and he goes, "Excuse me." And so I pop up out of my seat and I put out my hand. I said, "Yes, Mr. de Cordova," because I wanted him to know that I knew who he was. And he goes, tell me something. And he looks back over his shoulder at the band, and he looks back at me, and he says, is this any good? Well, I was relieved that he said a joke because just 2 seconds before that, I thought, I'm not getting kicked out by security. I'm going to get kicked out by the guy who runs the show. So you can imagine how relieved. And all he said was, is this any good? So I said something snarky back to him, like, odds will be favorable with the viewers, sir. And he asked my name. Of course, I'm standing there. I'm 23 years old. I got the long Jim Morrison hair, long leather coat, all still 80s, even though it's 1990. And he looks at me and he says, your name? And I said, I'm Mark Bennett. Shakes my hand again. He kind of looks me over once, and he goes, Constance Bennett, thanks for the note. He's making a joke saying that I look like Joan Bennett's sister, Constance Bennett.
Okay.
The hair. And he also got a kick at the fact that I knew who he was referring to.
Yeah.
And I laughed, and then, got a little couple quips. And it was also kind of a moment where he could show the crew that I've now met him. Yes, he won't hurt anybody. He's okay. He can stay. And he just, took a puff of his now cigarette and said, I suspect I'll be seeing you again sometime down the road. Thank you very much. And then he walked on. Well, to me, I felt like I just met Hollywood in person.
I got to point something out, too. It's interesting because you've been there. You weren't in anybody's way as far as you knew, and you were just observing, and you didn't have any double standards on your pockets. It's interesting because you had not met him prior to that, and yet somehow he knew of your presence. And when he comes up and he asks you, are we any good? It's kind of like, you know what? You've been here day after day after day after day after day. I'll ask you, what do you think? So obviously there was some faith there.
You actually described Fred very well. He was very much like that. He didn't care about pedigree or and so forth. What do you know? I'm sure he lived his whole life like that. He was always gracious to me. What was funny, though, is that out of that, I was obviously a little more welcomed. And then that led to, especially when Johnny announced his retirement, it was a real big deal, and all the stars wanted to come and do their final goodbye to Johnny. And so, and I ended up helping out the talent coordinators. And I did it for free. It's kind of dumb, but I didn't care about credit. I just did it for the honor of doing it.
Yes, absolutely. No fault in that.
And so when you get a call from the A-list talent coordinator guy, and he says, I just have a question. You're a fan of Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show, and you're a musician. He goes, I've got a lot of guests that want to come on and sing, what they're asking me, what's Johnny's favorite song? And he says, I'm from Brooklyn, he says. He says, if it's not Sinatra, I don't know anything. So what do you think Johnny likes, And I said, well, again, I'm just Nosnick, 23-year-old guy. But I was like, well, he's a war veteran, World War II. So I would assume that he would like all those old torch songs and those World War II songs, like, Here's That Rainy Day and I'll Be Seeing You. And, and I rattled off like 5 or 6 of those kinds of old songs, standards. And he's like, well, and again, this is a pre-Google world. He's like, could you write that down on a piece of paper, and I'll give you a drive on down the lot, and could you hand that to me so I can at least speak intelligently to my guests when they're calling? And I was like, sure. So, on a legal pad, I write down like 20 songs or something like that. I'll be seeing you, Here's That Rainy Day, writing it all out. I drive onto the lot. I hand it to the talent coordinator, and sure enough, as it happened, Stevie Wonder came on, and he sang I'll Be Seeing You, and Bette Midler came on, and she not only sang that wonderful One for the Road, which won her an Emmy, but she also sang a spontaneous Here's That Rainy Day with Johnny while she's paneling. So who am I? I was just a cog in the wheel, but I'd like to think I was just a little spark that got the ball rolling for Bette Midler's Emmy. What do you think?
You know what? Why not? Why not?
Why not, right?
Why not? Well, this is all very interesting, and it's kind of like, you get people that try too hard, but you're not really trying so hard is that you're just kind of like taking it in, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yes, that's totally true. It was, to me, it was like the Alice through the looking glass moment, and and especially if you work in entertainment, you find yourself in these situations where I've been watching this all my life, and now I'm here. So it's very bewildering. In fact, when Stevie Wonder came on, this is funny. He wanted to sing "I'll Be Seeing You," but he didn't know the words to the song. So that talent coordinator that I've been dealing with, he comes to me and he goes, "Do you know the words to "I'll Be Seeing You"?" And I said, yes. Now, the irony is the only reason I knew the words to "I'll Be Seeing You" is that 4 years prior, I was in high school, and I sang that song in a jazz group, a vocal group. This is why I know the song. So I'm so young at this point, I'm referencing a high school memory, a recent high school memory. So I said, yeah, I know. And he goes, well, here's what I want you to do. He says, I want you to go to Bobby Quinn, the director's booth where Bobby is. And when Stevie Wonder comes on, he'll have an earpiece. And so I want you to be there to go, "I'll be seeing you." So he can go, "I'll be seeing you in all the old familiar places. In all the old familiar places, everything is light again." And I was going to be that guy whispering in Stevie Wonder's ear. Here's another Hollywood moment. The stage manager of the Tonight Show, one of them, was the son of the director. And he was also a musician. And he came up to me, he goes, "Hey, man, I hear you're going to do that thing for Stevie." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Do you have those lyrics written down?" I said, "Yeah, I do." He said, "Actually, they want me to do it, so I'm going to thank you very much." He ended up being the guy.
Okay.
So, but nobody knows about that stuff that goes on behind the scenes. And, of course, if anybody watched the episode, it's, Stevie Wonder singing "I'll Be Seeing You." They don't know that someone's whispering in his ear. But because of those little things I did, and then more clips and moments with Fred, by the time Johnny retired, Fred had an office for life with the then NBC Productions. I was at a time when the networks could have in-house production company. That doesn't exist anymore. But as fate would happen or whatever, he brought me in because he liked my ideas or what have you, and he brought me in as a co-executive producer at NBC Productions. So I went from the two-bit, long-haired, black box theater actor getting little bit parts. Suddenly I'm a co-executive producer. I'm a creative executive. I didn't even know what a creative executive was. So you can imagine by the snap of his fingers how my head must have been spinning.
Just out of curiosity, did you ever meet Johnny Carson?
Oh, yeah, certainly. He was the kind of guy, and nobody really knew Johnny. He was very quiet and shy and aloof and so forth. It was all about the show for him. And who am I? Again, I totally was very crystal clear that I'm just a guest here, and you guys are being nice enough to let me watch and observe, or sometimes help out, or whatever. And but he was the kind of guy that if you said your name, if he was introduced to you, which he did with me, you'd said hi and I'm Mark Bennett, whatever. If you didn't see him backstage for another 6 months or whatever, again, who am I? He would come through before the show and he'd look at you and he'd go, "Hi, Mark, how you doing?" He would remember your name, and I'll always remember that. I just thought that he has to know so many people and meet so many new people. And he remembered my name, and I only said it once.
Wow.
And in fact, one of the I just always loved it before the show. That was my favorite part of the show, was the band would be playing. Ed McMahon is introducing the guests. It's just very electric back there, and Johnny's walking in with his hands in his pockets, and he would always go to this giant mirror that was behind the set, and he'd look at the mirror and he'd lick his fingers and tap the top of his hair down and check his fly and so forth. And then he would take this big breath and arch his back a little bit. And it's like you saw him become Johnny Carson. It was a real neat moment. And then he'd, take a left, and the stage manager would open the curtain and he'd go out and do the monologue. My favorite part of the show, of any show I saw, that when he would do that routine. But what was great is I was lucky enough to go to the wrap party after his last show, and he and Alex, his wife, took a helicopter to their house in Malibu, and nobody could believe that he was actually inviting NBC people and spouses and so forth, to his house and inviting all these people to the house. But sure enough, we were in the main house, and his house kind of looked like a hotel lobby in Kauai.
Okay.
There were boulders and rivers and fountains. It's huge. It was a triangular modern house with an all-glass roof, and you'd have these redwood slats, and you'd press a button, and those slats would go perpendicular and then back up, depending on if you wanted the sun to come in or not. And he was perched on a 200-foot bluff overlooking the ocean. It was gorgeous, but no evidence that he was the giant star that he was until we went to have the dinner, and that was across the street in his sunken tennis courts, which were gorgeous. You could live there. It was so beautiful. And Les Brown and his band of renown was playing the music, and Wolfgang Puck was doing the food. And it was in this sort of marbled outdoor living room area to watch, the tennis games that happen, only now it's tables and chairs and twinkly lights. This area is where you could see his Hollywood stuff and his memorabilia. And he had, in the corner, he had Buddy Rich's drum set, and he had a piano, and he had all these pictures that were given to him. There was a picture of Lucille Ball, Love You, Johnny, and there was a gift on a table from NBC. It was an original tube from an NBC camera from 1928 and some award he was giving. But all this memorabilia. And so I'm standing there looking at it and kind of drooling over all of it. I'm 25 years old. Who gets to see this, right? And, and this, of course, is 1990. And I hear someone behind me say, "So you're smoking?" And I was, because, in 1990, everybody smoked. But anyway, I turned around, and it's Johnny Carson walking toward me. I said, "Yeah." And he was smoking his Pall Mall cigarettes, and he says, "Have a seat." Okay, so I sat at this chair, and our knees are touching as we're sharing this ashtray, and it's just casual conversation. He liked that I was from Michigan, and I actually made him laugh. I said, when I was a kid, I said I was a magician, an amateur magician, and I said my family and I would go down to Colon, Michigan, which is known as the magic capital of the world. And Johnny goes, "Aladdin's magic." I said, "Yes, that's where we would get the tricks, And then I gave him a chuckle. I said, "So, I did the Kiwanis Club tour. Did the Kiwanis Club tour, And he just thought that was so funny because he did too. And just chit chat and about music, and he wanted to know if the piano he bought was any good, and he goes, "Well, you're a musician, and you tell me, And of course, while you're having this sort of casual, kind of almost banal kind of chit chatty cocktail talk conversation, you've got that third eye looking down at you, going, "I'm talking to Johnny Carson."
Yeah.
So he was a very, very, very nice to me. He was obviously very exhausted, but we chatted. I don't know, 7-10 minutes or so. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me. And then there were little chats a little later, that kind of thing. But he liked that we should have, strange. I'm 25, he was 66, and yet we had this magic thing in common. We had the Midwest in common. We had So he could. Well, you'd see it on the show how he was just as easy with Norman Mailer or whatever as he was the potato chip lady, and he had that gift. So anyway, it was nice to be on the receiving end of that, and I will never. That's probably the best Hollywood party I've ever been will ever be a part of.
So after Johnny Carson is retired and done, what opportunities were open to you after that?
Well, at the time, and they don't happen so much or that much anymore, but there was at the networks they had a specials department. They still do now, but it's called alternative programming, to accommodate reality television and all that stuff. And really, the only specials that are prominent today are the franchises, the Grammys and the Oscars and the Emmys and the People's Choice and American Music and so forth. But back in the 90s and before that, it was not uncommon to do a one-off special with some star, like Bob Hope's Salute to Young Comedians, or just a one-off thing, and that you could actually make a living just doing that, be a producer, and that's what Fred's contract or deal was about, and that's how he included me. So we developed and or produced, if needed or if approved by the network, one-off specials, and it's again something you don't see too much of anymore. Well, there was doing the development business, I at the time thought to myself, if I was president of the network, what kind of show do I want to see? And so I wrote this treatment down, and basically the conceit was I wanted to bring back variety television, because when I was a kid, that was appointment-setting television. That was family entertainment when the family would get together on Sunday nights, and we would watch, or Saturday nights we'd watch Carol Burnett, or we'd watch Sonny and Cher, or we'd watch Laugh-In, or we'd watch so forth. And so I wanted to kind of bring that style of TV back. And I'm thinking with Fred's Black Book, and he knew everybody from, high society to Hollywood to the White House, I think we can get some stars to show up. So I'm thinking, I think we could pull this off. And I wrote out this treatment, and I very nervously went to Fred's office. He always had an open door, but he would always say, "Yes, come in." And I would walk in, and I gave him the premise. I thought of this show, and I want to get your opinion on it. What do you think? Is it doable? And he looks at this, one sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, takes a puff of his Now cigarette, and the only thing he says was, "I wish this was on tomorrow night."
Yeah.
So that was the spark that began a Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, again, that I'll never forget, where ultimately we developed this program at NBC Productions. My option on my deal with them and Fred was coming to a close. We decided to form a company together, or I decided and asked Fred if you'd want to come along. And so that begets Nightingale Productions. Since we had some development in the project, we then went wide and went outside NBC, outside of the confines of NBC, which I was thinking to myself, Fred has been with NBC for 25 years. Who am I to uproot this guy? When was the last time he went out to pitch something? Was he with Jack Benny or George Burns? Mm-hmm. Who am I? But he was all raring to go. I mean, he was in his mid-80s at the time, but he was ageless. And, to him it was like, this is an adventure I want to do. And he really did help me. And we had meetings with presidents at what was then called the WB Network. And we were at ABC, and we went to CBS. By the way, walking into CBS Television City, which is, historical and in and of itself, walking in with Fred de Cordova at CBS, that was the other network that he did a lot of programs on, i.e. the Jack Benny program he produced and directed, the Burns and Allen show he produced and directed. He directed My Three Sons, The Smothers Brothers, December Bride, just a whole ton of shows, and but a lot of it was CBS. And the General Electric Theater, where he directed Noel Coward, Claudette Colbert, and Lauren Bacall in Blythe's Spirit. So you walk into CBS with him, it's like walking in with the president, Yep. Everybody is, "Hello, Mr. de Cordova. Hello, Mr. de Cordova." Of course, I'm just kind of behind him, thinking to myself, yeah, I'm with him. And as a matter of fact, there was this, I'm going to quote. There was this moment we were walking into our offices at CBS, and there was an older gentleman, like 60-something-year-old gentleman with a baseball cap, mustache, gray mustache, and headset. Kind of waddles up to us as we're at the elevator waiting to go up to our offices. And he's like, "Mr. de Cordova, Mr. Cordova, Mr. Cordova." And Fred, doesn't miss a beat. He goes, "Yes, sir." And he said, "I was your stage manager on the George Gobel show in 1955, and you were the producer and director of that show, and I loved working with you." And Fred was like, "Well, that was a marvelous show." And he goes, "You haven't changed since 1955. He's like, "Well, you haven't changed either. You look marvelous yourself." He's like, "Well, are you doing a show for us? Because if you are, I'd sure like the opportunity to do work for you." And Fred's like, "Well, we'll have to look into that." And he goes, "Well, a little later, I'll go up to your offices and I'll give you my card." He goes, "That would be splendid." Of course, while he's talking, he's pressing the elevator button repeatedly. right? Like that. The doors finally open. He's needling some more. We walk in. He's like, well, I'll talk to you later, Mr. de Cordova. And Fred says, yes, I will see you at that time. The elevator doors close. He looks at me and goes, who the fuck was he? So he was an amazing man and a very loyal person. And, you know, it was kind of nice that out of NBC's development, we were able to make this show. The deal we got at ABC Entertainment was a series of specials at 10 o'clock, 2 every month or something like that for 6 months or something. And the license fee was very high. They would never give a license fee today that high. And but I ended up detailing my experience with Fred and this particular moment of producing this show in a book I wrote called The Big Show. And shameless plug, you can find The Big Show on my website. It's kind of nice because you'll see a lot of detail and things that people say about it and endorsements and so forth. You can find that at www.markbennettauthor.com. That's MarkBennett author.com. And you could read a little thing about Johnny and read something about Fred and so forth. But that was I was asked actually to write this book by his wife. You know, I started out being a mentee, and he was my mentor. Well, by the time he passed away, he'd become more almost like a father figure kind of thing.
Yep.
And so I came home one day after I'd found out that Fred had passed away, and I got a call from his widow, his wife, Janet de Cordova, and she said she actually gave me the honor of being pallbearer at his funeral.
Okay.
And so once again, this is now, 2001, and now I'm in my early 30s. And my joke at that time was, you know, even in death, Fred has thrown me into uncharted waters, because there I am, and standing around the casket, I'm one of the pallbearers, but I'm also standing next to Don Rickles, Gary Shandling, Bob Newhart, an executive from Carson Entertainment, and one of the other executive producers from The Tonight Show, Peter Lassalle. And I'm saying, and then there was this guy.
Wow.
Like, you know, this Mount Rushmore of show business, and who's that kid? So I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and it was a marvelous service, and it was, you know, you can imagine for him to know 68 years in show business of people and be beloved by that many people. I'd like to be that guy someday, because that's pretty hard to accomplish, but he was that. And but it was Janet after that said, you should write a book about your experiences with Fred. I mean, you know, Creative Artist Agency was your agent, and you were just a kid, and you did all these things, and, you know. And so it wasn't even my idea. It was Janet's idea. And so thank you, Janet, for the idea, and thank you, Fred, for the story. But you can find The Big Show at www.markbennettauthor.com, and also Amazon and Barnes & Noble, or wherever books are sold online.
How long did it take you to write that book?
Strangely, not as long as you'd think, only because I had a soft briefcase filled with all the notes from that era. Because as I told Fred one time, because I was always making notes. Remember when we all had day runners, you know, that had calendar and notes and stuff back in the day? So I had this day runner, and it was like a diary. And I would write everything that was said, done, you know, required, anything. Because I told Fred, you know, it's one thing to know you're lucky in retrospect. It's quite another to know you're lucky as it's happening. And so I didn't want to forget a thing. So jump all these years later, you know, and Janet gives me the idea to write a book, and I just had to go to that little briefcase and take out all these notes, things people said, what was done, how it was done. So I had a lot of help by something I'd written 20 years prior, or whatever it was, almost 15, 18 years. So I just wrote this manuscript. I refer to it as a nonfiction novella, taking a little tip of the hat to Truman Capote, because the tone of The Big Show is kind of like Truman Capote's A Christmas Memory. Kind of the same kind of themes. And he coined the phrase nonfiction novel. So this is smaller than that. I called it a nonfiction novella, a tribute to my mentor and friend, Fred de Cordova. And it's basically Tuesdays with Maury in show business.
You kept mentioning the Big Show, and I'm thinking of that WWE wrestler.
Yes, there is yes. It's known as the Big Show. Yes. Fortunately, no one will confuse the two things. So I don't think.
No, but no, you mentioned. You gotta tell you where you can find the Big Show. And I'm like, yeah, WrestleMania this weekend.
Yeah, WrestleMania.
No, but when the book got done, like, what was that like? Like, it must have been a real sense of accomplishment to get all of this down on paper. Was there a real struggle to do that, or were you very well organized with that?
Well, it's a little bit of both, really. I think in a lot of ways it was kind of cathartic because, everybody's got a war story. Everybody's been in the trenches. But I was lucky enough because of all of Fred's experience in his relationships, I got to cross that moat and be on the other side of the moat where, in the world of Fred, it's not like it's not the kind of show business that people imagine, It's not Swimming with Sharks or Kevin Spacey. When you're lucky to toe dip into Fred's world, he's weeded out all those guys, And I've never met a bunch of more upstanding, honest, straightforward, forthright people in business. Fred and his relationships and who I got to toe dip with completely demystified my whole idea of what I thought show business was. Because Hollywood likes to trump up itself and make fun of itself, so people tend to believe that that's the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to tell you it's not, at least, in his world and his experience. So, he's gone. Janet's gone. I wrote this thing, and I was like, it was cathartic in the sense it was like, oh, yeah, I did do that, But what's better is that because it is kind of a Tuesdays with Maury in show business, what I have found since the book got published, some readers I'll hear from, and they start talking about their mentors. And it doesn't even have to be in entertainment or Hollywood, because everybody's been in a situation where somebody took them under their wing when they were very green or, didn't know up from down, whatever. Or they just, they were not born on third base, just starting out, and there's some old timer in the office or a teacher or, a teacher in your high school or something that, kind of helps you along. So I would get all these stories from people who'd read my story. Oh, I had this mentor. In fact, I remember one guy said, I had a mentor. I worked at Macy's, and he was marvelous, and just went on this whole tale about this boss of his at Macy's department store.
Yeah.
So there's a universality I have discovered in the Big Show that seems to resonate with readers, because you've got people in your life where you run across people that aren't family that actually take a risk with you and say, hey, kid, let me show you how it's done. And then the counter to that is, do you take your risk? And that risk is to say yes.
Yeah.
I'll go along with this. Even though you're taking the empty-handed leap into the void, you're willing to take your risk. And I guess the Big Show is, in the end, is dedicated to all those people who selflessly share what they know and change the way we receivers think.
Wow. And the book is done well, huh?
I'm sorry?
The book is done quite well, huh?
Well, it's modest. It's a small publisher, Larry Shawaka Publishing, and I was very grateful that. And this, again, I've always said my entire professional adult life, everything I've done in my professional adult life has never been in the plan.
That's right.
Everything.
Well, I can kind of relate in a way too, because I started. Excuse me. I was born in the 70s, so I didn't start I've always loved the movies, and television.
Right.
And my parents used to take my brothers and I to the drive-in movie theaters. And now we don't have those anymore. But I always
Right.
loved movies. And it was 1996 I started doing film criticism. And I still do film criticism. And
Right.
I started here at CHSR in 2005, early
Uh-huh.
2005. And it started out where for years I'd read my film reviews on here. I haven't read a film review on here in quite a while, every now and again, because it was in April of 2015, I ended up with an interview with Tommy Wiseau of The Room.
Uh-huh.
And after that interview, it was like, who else can I interview? And from there, I started interviewing a lot of people from movies that I liked and a lot of performers that I loved. And it's really interesting that like if somebody was to tell me 5 years ago I was going to be interviewing people from movies and television and show business and music, I'd be saying, really,
Yeah.
I'd like, you got to be bluffing,
Yeah.
and you're my 102nd interview I have done since Tommy, and it's like, wow, I can't. It's kind of like with you going across to the studio and seeing the surreal thing happening, and you can't believe you're there. And I've never been outside New Brunswick. I've never, and it's like nobody talks about New Brunswick in the movies or television. I never hear it mentioned, and yet it's surreal that I'm able to do this. So I can kind of relate to you in that manner.
That's great, and I think what you just said validates my discovery of some of the readers who've read it, and they share their stories. And I think that's the thing that makes any story transcend and universal. Is oh yeah, that totally happened to me. It doesn't have to be Fred de Cordova or NBC or Johnny Carson. It's the same script, and nothing has changed. And I love getting other people's stories back. So that has been a real treat. As a matter of fact, just to kind of backtrack a little, my own father, all my childhood, he was in the printing business, and he even had his own printing company for 22 years. Put me through college, that kind of thing. But there was this gentleman named Mr. Wild. Don't even know his first name, but Mr. Wild was the guy that got my father, long before I was born, into the printing business when he was a newlywed with my mother. And so I would hear, anytime I would hear as a kid the mention of Mr. Wild, there was always this certain reverence of when they'd say his name, because he basically helped Dad provide for his family, et cetera, et cetera. And so when he reads The Big Show, he thinks of Mr. Wild, and I think that's really kind of special. I like that because Fred de Cordova was my Mr. Wild,
Yeah.
And I think most people in some form or another, even if it is in the form of a teacher in high school or a teacher in junior high or middle school or whatever, there's always that, hey kid, let me show you how it's done, or let me help you. And that in and of itself is the gift when someone does that for you.
I wanted to ask, you met the people like Johnny Carson and all these people. I was wondering, is there any other celebrities, like you mentioned Val Kilmer, Meg Ryan, any celebrities that you have met that's made a really big impression on you? You got any stories there?
Well, it's funny because Woody Allen has this line. I read it. I've never met Woody Allen, but I read this line, and he said, "You never get over the complete awe of anybody who got famous before you were 18." And I think that is so spot on perfect, because it's true. Because like when Fred and I were doing, I'll call it the show of The Big Show, and because we're dealing with Fred's Black Book, it was kind of great because, all networks challenge producers. Can you get that guy? Can you get that guy? And which is a valid question by the network because, they got to cover their own business, and they have their guys to answer to, and those guys have those guys to answer to. So everybody's got to answer to somebody. So, and so to protect the investment and their jobs. But with Fred, he's such a legend. You know, you're sitting right there. Can you get that guy? You know, and all I had to do was point to Fred to my left. You know, so nobody could really argue. Like, yeah, I think, yeah, I got his home number. You know, so but because of him, I got to talk with Jack Lemmon. I mean, wow, he is such an amazing. I've you know, obviously seen many of his pictures and was a fan. And he was a great musician, a great pianist, and he's Jack Lemmon, and he's calling me up. He told me, he said it was when he agreed to be a part of the show, he said, this sounds like the most fun that I've ever had as an actor since the days of live television in the 50s.
Wow.
That's a pretty good endorsement, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, especially from him.
Right, and just those kind of mythical people that, you know, have only been on the big screen or have only been on television at award shows, and suddenly you're having this personal conversation. He wasn't even on the list of approved names by the network, but I got a call from John Ritter. God bless John Ritter, the nicest man in show business. And he was driving through the canyon, and he's like, "Is this Mark Bennett?" I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Hi, this is John Ritter. You know, I was, you know, I don't know if he was playing golf or whatever. I was having a conversation with somebody I didn't know, and he said he told me about this amazing thing that you're doing on ABC, and you're shooting it at CBS. And I was just wondering if you don't mind, but I want to be a part of your party."
Wow.
So as a producer, you go, "Yes, sir."
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, that was the kind of enthusiasm we were getting from a lot of major talent. I mean, it's like, let's figure something out for me to do on this show, or you know, I got this a lot. How did you sell something like this to a network for prime time? I got that so much. And my joking response was, well, I told the network it was performance-driven. I just never told them it was a variety show.
I grew up watching John Ritter and like Three's Company, you know, and
Yep.
it's sad because when he passed away, I always felt bad because when John Candy passed away, I wasn't a big fan of his last movie, Wagons East, you know, and John Candy was a great talent. I'll say this for John Ritter, his last movie, Bad Santa, people could say what they want to. I laughed and laughed and laughed at Bad Santa, and it was sad to see John Ritter go, but I was glad he went out on a high like Bad Santa, you know, because it's the faces he made, you know, when he's trying to avoid profanity and these vulgarities. Sitting with another great late actor, Bernie Mac, those scenes where they're going back and forth in the faces. Yeah. So
another thing that was unusual, because we were dealing both with scenes and, you know, acting performances, but also music in the show, the big show. And so I get this call, and to me, all it sounds like is a gentleman. I mean, I know who it is, but it's just a gentleman speaking the Queen's English. Sounds a very proper Queen's English sounding gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
And he's pitching me a song he'd like to do for the show. And he said it was a song, and he gives me the whole backstory that he was on the beach, and I was thinking of this. And he goes, hang on a sec, let me get my guitar. Can I sing it for you? Do you have time? Can I sing it for you? And I said, sure, you know. And as soon as he started singing, it was no longer the Queen's English voice. It was the voice of Elvis Costello.
Wow.
It was such a wonderful reveal, and so, you know, because Elvis Costello has a very distinct sound to his voice, and he's singing. So I put my phone on speaker, and I'm like waving my staff to come in. Check us out.
Wow.
So there were some fun moments like that. It's all in the book, The Big Show, and you can get that at markbennettauthor.com. or Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever books are sold online.
Wow. So what are you doing now in 2017? Tell us, bring us up to date here. Besides sitting in leaving your poor wife in a movie theater to come and talk to me and Steve and join her.
Well, it's funny because, you know, Fred didn't make me a millionaire. But every once in a while, I get to go to some really cool parties.
Yep.
And so I only say this because, I think it was in 2009. I had worked after Fred. I'd worked with Marty Krofft of Sid Marty Krofft.
Okay.
We worked and developed a special in the very waning days of when people did specials. But we worked together. He is a marvelous man. And then that led to me working in creative affairs at a children's programming company called Deke Entertainment, where we did live action and animated content for a 3-hour block on CBS. And so I was doing that. And then in 2008, a lot was going on not only in the country, but also in the States. So there was nothing unusual what happened to me, but the chairman of our company sold his company, and all of us who worked there at Deke Entertainment got laid off. And so I wasn't planning on going back to doing that thing I did 19 years ago, but it was starting to show its face. Anyway, once in a while I get a call, and I got a call from this major producer for his 75th birthday. The only reason I know him, of course, is because of Fred and my past with him and so forth. So he was celebrating his 75th birthday at what's called here the Annenberg Beach House, which was funded by Wallace Annenberg, philanthropist, and it was this huge white party, and it was ABC executives and Broadway people, and Barry Manilow was there, and Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown, was there, and Debbie Allen, and just a lot of New York Broadway people and ABC TV people. Okay, so the only reason I'm there is because, well, I know Fred. I was going up, and this location, by the way, used to be Marion Davies' beach house that William Randolph Hearst built for her, and Marion Davies was his mistress. So it had been dormant for many decades, and they converted it into this really nice outdoor activity place with a pool and all this stuff. Anyway, this was before it opened, and so his birthday is at this really cool place, Old Hollywood place. And I go up to get some hors d'oeuvres. And I walk up the steps, and I happen to look to my right, and there, sitting in a chair, is Don Rickles. And now, this is 9 years after Fred's funeral. But I saw him sitting in a chair. There's a bunch of people circling around him or whatever. And I walk up the steps, and I go to the hors d'oeuvre table. Now, my back is to him. I'm just picking out my hors d'oeuvres. And I hear from behind me, I know you. Why do I know you? And I turn around, and it's Don Rickles with both his hands outstretched to me. So I went, and people are kind of laughing, and I went up to, and I said, Mr. Rickles, I said, my name is Mark Bennett. I said, the last time we were face to face was at Fred de Cordova's services, and just if anybody mentions Fred's name, and Don did it, he had that wistful look on his face, kind of like saying, "Ah, dear Freddie," that kind of look. And I said, and at that time, you shook my hand and you said to me, "Let's hope we meet again under happier times." And I said, and I think we just did. So for the rest of the night, if I pass him or whatever, you go, "Mark, Mark," and they go, "Hey, Mark," doing all this kind of stuff. It's very funny. At the end of the party, I said to my wife, I said, "Hey, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Rickles." And she said, "Oh, sure, And so we go up, and everybody's kind of getting ready to leave, standing up from the table. And I come up to him, and he goes, "Yes, Mark," he says. And I said, "Mr. Rickles," I said, "I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Mandy." And he goes, "No autographs." And of course, typical Rickles. And then he leans forward and he goes, "It's a very pleasure to meet you, dear Mandy. You look lovely tonight." It was just so Don Rickles.
Yeah.
That's my Zelig-like existence. At the same party, of course, it was Barry Manilow was there, and he was kind of opening up the conversation to include me. And I'm just standing right next to my table where we were sitting. So I'm standing up for a table because he wanted to, introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Barry Manilow." But I actually got to say this: "Hi, I'm Mark Bennett, and Mr. Manilow, this is my wife, Mandy." So I got a kick out of saying that. So.
Yeah, of course. When I think of Don Rickles, I think of Mr. Potato Head and
Yes.
the Toy Story movies.
Yes, yes. He's a very, very, very sweet, big-hearted man. He and Bob Newhart have been lifelong vacationing friends and have been everywhere around the world together. And as a matter of fact, Bob Newhart was gracious enough to write a little foreword on my book that I wrote called The Big Show. So he didn't have to do that, but it is kind of funny, too. I was doing whatever I was doing, and phone rings, and I look at the number that's not familiar to me, but I realize that looks like Beverly Hills number, you know. I pick up the phone, and I heard, Mark? I go, yes. It's Bob Newhart. So thanks to him, he wrote a cute little foreword, tipping the hat to Fred and Janet de Cordova for my book, The Big Show. So after getting the book published and doing book signings and things like that, and wonderful interviews with your program and others, I, in a again twist of fate, nothing. You know, I've done nothing that's been in the plan. I was during all that 2008, almost another Great Depression happening to our country and our state, and trying to get a job was impossible. I'm doing what you have to do to try to find one or whatever. And I got a call from my longtime friend of 14, 15 years and neighbor, Ted Melfi, who actually today he wrote and directed St. Vincent.
Okay.
You know that, starring Bill Murray.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yep, and he wrote and directed Hidden Figures, that was just nominated for an Oscar. But at the time, he was just a director for commercials. And so it was totally random and out of the blue. And he calls me as I'm looking up job searches and stuff that, that some HR person would recognize my resume would be a fit. He calls me up and he's a commercial director. He says, when was the last time you were in front of a camera? And I said, 1,000 years. And he said, well, would you like to be in a couple of my commercials? I'm like, well, I'm thinking, well, I don't really have anything better to do. So unbeknownst to me, and what was happening was it started this another phase, and I was just doing little bits for this commercial. It was a grocery store chain commercial in the Midwest, and he was the director, and I remember him looking at me in between takes, and he goes, isn't this great? You remember this? Do you remember how to do this, right? It's great, right? No stress, right? Pretty good, huh? That kind of thing. And I, of course, was very thankful that, I'm actually doing this thing that I'd done 19 years prior. I never thought in a million years I'd be back doing that. And then that has led to doing some things in front of the camera. I've done a couple of short films, and one called Cutthroat, where I was cast as a sociopathic Hollywood agent, which a lot of people say, hey, I can totally see that. That's a perfect fit, which is alarming in and of itself. And but I've also worked on the crew side, where I stand in for the talent for various television shows. And I work with the director of photography and the lighting guy and the sound guy sometimes, and the camera crew. And we literally do, sometimes completely do, and block out the scene that they're going to shoot. And then when that's all set up and everything's ready to go, the talent comes in, and then you pass on the direction that was given to you on where they're blocked and where they hit their marks and so forth. So I basically do everything you see on camera. They just haven't shot it yet. And I got to do that on the show Extant, which was on CBS. It starred Halle Berry and was executive produced by Steven Spielberg.
Okay.
And so I did that for 2 seasons. 2 years, and then I've also done the same kind of job on the show Mistresses, that did shoot in Canada, I might add, for 3 of the 5 years it was on, but they had come down here in their last season, and so I was standing in for the talent on that show, and I have a couple short films coming up that have yet to be shot, that a couple directors have called and asked me to be in, so I would have given my eye tooth 27 years ago to have some of the things that have happened to me, never knowing in a million years I'd be back doing it again. But you just, I'm sort of in a say yes to everything, and something works out. The producer told me that once.
What was Halle Berry like? You met her, huh?
Oh, yeah, she's marvelous. She was wonderful. And she's from the Midwest too. She's from Ohio, and you talk to her, it's like, oh, I know that girl, I know that person. But she's very sweet, very huggy. She'd always come up behind me and, hi, Mark, can you give me a hug? And it is rough doing a 60-hour work week with Halle Berry. It's kind of rough.
You want me to tell you?
It'd be 4 a.m, and she would go to hair and makeup, and I'd always say, it's 4 a.m. She's going to hair and makeup just as a courtesy. She's just doing it just to be nice.
I'm going to tell you
she's
about
Halle Berry, but she is wonderful, and a lot like Fred. She doesn't care about pedigree. She just loves people, and so she's just as comfortable with the grips as she is with Steven Spielberg, and she's just a really sweetheart of a person, and I felt very fortunate to. And of course, because of Halle Berry and Steven Spielberg, it didn't feel like a television show. It felt like we were shooting a movie.
I'll tell you this about Halle Berry. I'm a member of the Golden Raspberry Award Foundation, and I've been a member of it since 2003.
Oh, I guess.
She showed up for Catwoman. Yeah, and I thought that was so cool that she had showed up, because Catwoman was kind of horrible. But I love the fact she had enough of a sense of humor to say, look, she had her Oscar for Monsters Ball in one hand and the Razzie in the other, and I just admired her for doing that.
Yes, I think you were not the only one that thought that. It was wonderful that she did that. I had a friend that was doing B camera shooting of that particular award show from my company, my children's programming company. It was just sort of a side job he did to help out a friend. Mm-hmm. And so he was shooting all this footage, and he was the one who said, last night Halle Berry actually came. I was like, that's great.
They've had a few people, but I wish they would get the Razzies on television. But there's so many celebrities that don't like the Razzies, but I love it because it kind of allows me to throw it back at some of these films that really, they should be a little more embarrassed about they haven't made, but...
Yeah, well, like I said, no one sets out to do a bad picture, and no one sets out to do a bad television show. There's just there's so many variables that anybody has to deal with, a producer or anything, or a writer or an actor or whatever, that what started out as an innocent, hey, that sounds like a great idea, and then it ends up the way it does.
But Halle Berry,
one finger to one person and say it's his fault.
Yeah. But Halle Berry shows up, and I thought that was so big of her to do that. And Sandra Bullock also showed up too for All About Steve, and stuff like that. Is very admirable. You mentioned Steven Spielberg. Did you met him?
Yeah, well, I've actually kind of been in his presence on 2 different occasions. The first time, which is funny, because I'm pretty good at recognizing people, stars and things like that. But I was at the Academy because they were having a celebration of George Stevens' life and his career, and they were celebrating him. In fact, his wife, Mrs. Stevens, came, and it was just one of those huge events. Warren Beatty was there, and so forth. And as a matter of fact, I saw Mrs. Stevens. She's in a wheelchair. She was 97 at the time. And Warren Beatty walks up to her. Of course, George Stevens directed him in Splendor in the Grass. So he goes up to Mrs. Stevens. Mrs. Stevens, it's Warren Beatty. And she goes, well, hello. And she goes, I want to introduce you to my wife. She goes, come here, give me a hug. And so he bends over Mrs. Stevens, and she's patting him on the back, and she goes, oh, you naughty, naughty boy. So it was a splashy event, and I'm standing there, and this sort of bespectacled professorial-type person starts walking up to me. He's kind of a little disheveled. He's wearing sort of a corduroy sport jacket and some jeans. He's very casual, and a beard and mustache, And he's just about to come up and introduce himself and shake my hand when somebody motions or something, and he kind of catches his attention, and he goes, to them. I was like, I wonder who that was, because he was very much shorter than I was, but I couldn't place him. And so when at the event, we're in the auditorium, and Warren Beatty is up, and he introduces the next segment, which is going to be the Diary of Anne Frank, and the next celebrity is going to come up and introduce and talk about Anne Frank. He goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, Steven Spielberg," and that guy was sitting behind me, and I was like, "Holy cow, that was Steven Spielberg!" Because when I see Steven Spielberg, it's on an award show. He's got an award in his hand, and he's wearing a tux, and the camera's shooting up. So he just looks like the Mount Rushmore of show business. I love Steven Spielberg, but I couldn't believe that I didn't recognize him, 3 feet in front of me. It's like that Alice through the looking glass kind of moment. But then when I was doing Extant, and he would come to the set, everybody was like a cat on a hot tin roof. I was like, Steven Spielberg's there. And I did not mistake him this time. So I promise you there. But he's very cool. He's just everything you'd think he'd be. He's a very down-to-earth, nice guy,
Yeah, what a career he's carved out for himself.
Yeah. Oh, well, geez. There's no comparison.
No. And
There's no comparison. But anyway, it was a real treat to be a part of that very unique show for its time, and it only lasted 2 years. But everybody associated with that show feels like a very unique family. All shows have a familial kind of feel to it, but there was something a little extra. There was a little extra oomph. And actually, as a thank you for the 2 years of working on the show, to the woman who has everything and is worth billions of dollars, whatever, I just wanted to give her a little thank you, something that I knew she didn't have. So I gave her a hardcover copy of The Big Show.
Yeah.
Yeah, she gave me a huge hug and a kiss on the cheek, and she said, "Oh my God, I can't remember. I was like, I didn't know you were an author. Oh my God," So she was very sweet and very genuine as she is. So, somewhere there's a copy of The Big Show holding up the small round table in the breakfast nook, so it won't, rattle.
No. I would say it'd be placed right on top of the coffee table for everybody to see.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Excuse me. Anyway, what was you going to say?
I was just going to say, it's for 27 years, it's been a very interesting ride, and I never could have predicted it. But, say yes to everything, and something works out. And I think the producer that told me was very wise in saying that.
Yeah, well, I can kind of relate to you in that fashion, Yeah. So you want to give your book another plug again on your website, another plug?
Well, you're very kind, and thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
You can find it online at www.markbennettauthor.com. That's MarkBennett author.com, www.markbennettauthor.com, or you can find it on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or wherever books are sold online.
Yes, that's quite an incredible story. And I'll tell you, next time I watch The Doors, I'm going to be looking for this guy that's sweating over standing next to Meg Ryan.
I did go to a 20th anniversary screening, and it was with a panel, and Oliver Stone was there, and Val was there, and whatever. And so it was the first time that I had seen it on the big screen back then. And I'm sitting there, and that scene comes up, and the camera goes over the audience, and goes up to Meg. I took everything to not stand up and look at that kid on the screen and say, "You're in for one real wild ride, and you have no idea what's coming."
Was Meg Ryan there? Did you stand and sweat next to her?
Yes, I did. We were all sweating, I think, but yeah, she was very funny, and then she likes. She was laughing at some jokes I was making, or just being a kid, So, but she was delightful.
And then she went home to Love Street.
Yes, Love Street and on to Dennis Quaid at the time. They were dating.
Dennis, yeah, that's always that loophole thrown in there, Well, yeah. At least you got the sweat next to her. So. Yeah,
well, that's true. Like an occasional hug. Have a good night. That kind of thing. So, no, it was all a wonderful, wild experience. But I really appreciate everything that you've done for me on this program, and I just thank you for spotlighting the Big Show book, and thank you very much, Greg.
Does your wife realize that she stole you from Meg Ryan potentially?
Actually, it was funny. I I was in keeping with that line of humor. I was working on extant, and I was pulling. Often it's 60-hour work week, so you're doing 12 to 14 hours daily shift. So it's grueling in its own kind of way. But I was working on location, and it was on Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife got a big kick out of calling her girlfriend. She goes, "Hey, I'm just wondering if we could have a girl night tonight because Mark's with Halle Berry on Valentine's Day, and it's going to be a real late night for him."
Were you sweating next to Halle Berry too? Yeah. No, I was going to say it was fantastic having you on here. I mean, Steve Joyner he's got a real eye for talent because I tell you, anytime he contacts me, he says, "Have you heard of so-and-so?" And at the time I had not heard of you. And he says, he gave me a brief synopsis of who you were and what you've done. And he goes, "You got to have this guy on your show. It'd be a great story." And Steve's been very, very terrific at finding people on the show because I never really met Steve until late last year. I think I interviewed Lisa Wilcox, my 50th interview from a couple of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and I think he was on her friends list, and I think he added me through her. And since Lisa was on his friends list, I thought, well, okay, what harm? So I added him, and I would always see his post, and I noticed we had a few things in common. And have a few similar experiences. And so I reached out to him this year. I actually won the Barry Award for last year. I did 20 interviews in 2015. I did 48 last year. And already this year, as of 34. And this is like April Fool's Day. And I've already done 34. And I'm like, gee, is it possible I could have 100 interviews plus on here for this year? And I said, that is just so surreal for me, and Steve's provided a lot of talent coming on here.
Well, that's great. And thank you, Steve, for being the messenger, and thank you for that nice compliment. And it's been a real super pleasure being on your program. Thank you so much, Greg.
Yes, and before you go, would you
sir.
mind doing a plug for my show?
Do I mind doing a plug for your show?
Yeah.
Sure. What would you like me to say?
Just state your name and even mention you're the author of The Big Show. And my name is Greg Gilbert. My show's called Python's Paradise, Python like the snake. And, of course, we're in New Brunswick, Canada.
Okay. I was going to say Python's Paradise.
Yep.
Good. Almost a twister.
There you go. That's okay, because a lot of people get it wrong the first time, so it don't matter. Don't worry about it.
Okay, Greg Gilbert, Python's Paradise. I'm just trying to get that in my mouth.
Yep.
And you want me to mention New Brunswick?
Yeah, New Brunswick, Canada. We don't want people to think it's New Jersey. We're competing with those people. For attention.
New Brunswick. Okay, Python's Paradise.
There you go.
I'll get it. I'll do it.
All right, go.
This is Mark Bennett, the author of The Big Show, a tribute to my mentor of legendary television producer Fred de Cordova. You are listening to Greg Gilbert on Python's Paradise in New Brunswick, Canada.
Well, Mark, I wish you the very, very best. If you want me to, I can throw you a friend's request on Facebook if you like.
I would love that.
Yeah, and you got anything coming up in the future, you want to promote it on here, you feel free anytime, to let me know, and I don't mind having guests come back on here and expand the horizons even further.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your hospitality, and thank you for spotlighting my book, The Big Show. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Had a great time.
You have yourself a great day, and God bless.
Thank you. You too. Thank you, Greg. Take care.
Bye-bye.